Teachers and educators, a new brand of leadership, coming up right here on the Leadership Voice. Welcome to the Leadership Voice. I'm your host, Jay Barbuto. Today's show is all about leadership in the educational industry. Joining us today will be Bill Evans, founder and CEO of Evan-Moor Educational Publishers. And we also have Rachelle Cracchiolo, founder and CEO of Teacher Created Materials. But let's start things off with today's quote of the day. Today's quote comes from Nelson Mandela. Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. An educated community is one that is safer, cleaner, and more likely to thrive. Our first guest today on the Leadership Voice is Bill Evans, CEO and founder of Evan-Moor Educational Publishers. He has many professional interests. He has been the speechwriter to the Chancellor of the Los Angeles Community Colleges. He was an associate professor of journalism at East Los Angeles College. He practiced law for 7 years in Monterey, California, but the great love of his life was founding and running Evan-Moor Educational Publishers during the past 40 years. The company publishes across the curriculum from grades pre-K through 8th grade. Their books are distributed in thousands of bookstores in over 90 countries. They also sell directly to teachers and parents on their website, www.evanmoor.com. It is a great pleasure to welcome to the Leadership Voice, Bill Evans.
And it's great to be here.
Bill, it's so wonderful to have you on the show. We can talk about leadership in the educational industry.
I'm looking forward to it.
Maybe we can start by sharing a little bit about your background and how you came to found and start this company, Evan-Moor Publishing.
Sure. Well, my first job, actually while I was still in college, I was offered a position as a speechwriter to the Chancellor of the LA Community Colleges, and I did that for about 6 years. I did a radio show and a little bit of television in that time too. I then decided to change positions, and I got a teaching position at East LA College. I enjoyed that very much, and I went to law school at night because that's something I had wanted to do. But as many students are having the problem that I couldn't afford it, I had to get a full-time day job in order to go to law school. Mm-hmm. And then my sister came and spent her sabbatical with me down in North Hollywood. She was living up in Monterey, California, which is where the company is and where I now live. And she wanted me to call publishers around the nation and get her book published that she'd written with a team teacher friend. And I said, so you're coming to LA, so I'll do this? And she said, well, we're not really good at rejection. And we've noticed that you're really good at rejection. And because you have to talk to a lot of people that say no. And so I did that for her, and we've got a whole box of rejection letters. And as I was making the calls, though, and looking at the book, I thought, this is really great. This could have legs. This could really grow. And so I said, let's publish it ourselves. And we each put in $7,500, including Joellen and Joy and myself. And we started the business. Probably we would have gone out of business in a year, and then something really wonderful happened. Well, a couple of things happened. I met your next guest, Rachelle Cracchiolo, and at a trade show, one of the first trade shows I'd ever gone to. And I walk up to her. I noticed she had 9 books. I had 6 books. And I said, hi, my name's Bill Evans, and I don't know very much about this business, but I'll tell you everything I know if you'll tell me everything you know. And she laughed and accepted that, and we've been calling each other monthly ever since that. So that was a wonderful occurrence. The other thing was meeting a woman named Elizabeth Cater, and she was the director of teacher book clubs with Macmillan. And my first phone call with her was, Bill, I want to buy 20,000 copies of each of your books. And she said, before you get too excited, I'm not going to pay you much for them. But I said yes, because anyone who's going to put 20,000 of those books out in circulation, that fabulous. That was God's biggest sampling program. So I said yes, and she did that. She also provided insight into what the market wanted. So she was a great trainer of a new publisher. And that gave us enough money that first year to go into a second year and then a third year. And probably for 15 or 20 years, she took every book we published. Many times it's because it's the book she'd asked for. And then meanwhile grew our distribution channel.
And so did you ever imagine that it would grow to the size that it eventually has grown?
No, not really. I thought I'd be practicing law for the rest of my life. And one of the big differences between practicing law and publishing is fun. And practicing law, you're surrounded by usually unhappy people. I mean, there were a couple of adoptions and partnership formations, but you know, car accidents and divorce are not fun.
You know, people are always curious about what is the key to success or what made a company succeed. As you think about the success that Evan-Moor has had, what do you attribute the success of Evan-Moor most to?
We have fun. Everyone who works for me has fun doing their job. It's a rule. And I generally I do walk-around management. So I was in the warehouse and there was a new employee and I said to him, you know, are you having fun? And another employee from the other end of the warehouse came running over and said, tell him yes, tell him yes. If you say no, he'll fire you. So.
Which isn't true.
No, it's not true. But it was funny.
Yes,
yeah.
I love.
And funny is a lot of fun.
I love stories like that. But you know, you mentioned earlier one of the things that seemed to make a big difference in your early success. You talked about the publisher. Was it from Macmillan?
Yes.
And one of the things you mentioned is that you started publishing books that she was asking for. And so what you were demonstrating there is that and you didn't list it as one of the keys to success, but I think what you described as the company culture of creating a fun working environment was a key to its success. But it also sounds like you did a fair amount of listening.
Oh yeah, definitely. You have to hear what the customer is saying. You have to hear what your employees are saying. So that's an important part of it.
How much success do you think you would have had if you weren't listening?
None. I mean, none at all. It's sort of a rule.
No, and you know, a lot of times when people go into businesses, they go in assuming that they have the answers.
Right.
And what we're starting to see more and more is that the most successful people don't think that they have all the answers, but that they ask.
Yeah. Well, I had a really wise college professor, Bob Rivera. He was a debate coach of mine. And he once told me, I think my quest was, well, what's the answer? And he looked at me and he said, don't ask me what the answer is. He said, ask me what the question is. He said, the question is eternal. The answers are constantly changing. But the answer, if you have the right set of questions and you ask them over and over again, because believe me, he said, the difference between now and 10 years ago and 10 years hence are going to be completely different answers. So you have to be ready to accommodate the changes that commerce is going to put on you.
No, I love that. You know, the beauty is oftentimes in the question.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so as you think about your leadership and your leadership philosophy, I know you mentioned you like to create a culture of fun. When you think about your leadership philosophy, how would you say what is it? And then maybe how it might differ from other leaders that you've had the opportunity to interact with.
Well, realize that for 40 years I've worked at Evan-Moor. So comparing myself to other companies elsewhere is hard for me to do because I don't have much knowledge about that. But I can tell you that what has been commented on by business friends of mine is the amount of openness that you find in Evan-Moor. I mean, I want the editorial staff to be looking at the sales figures so that they know what they've written and how it's doing. And we sit down and have meetings about that so that they know what the sales are. And I've been to a lot of publishing companies where they don't inform their editorial staff about which are the best sellers and which didn't do well too, and why. So that's, again, asking more questions. That's part of setting a foundation for the company. But we share the entire financial basis of the company with the entire employee population. Once a year at the all-company meeting, we put up how much, what things cost. It's to really emphasize that the most expensive thing in a publishing company anyway are people, so that they get to see that a large share of the revenues that are coming in are going to their salaries and their benefits. So I would say openness, share between departments. There isn't an unimportant department in a company.
And I think that that description of that transparency is a really a foundational piece that we're seeing a lot more and more and more and more as successful companies emerge. Companies that are a little bit more transparent do tend to have employees that are more trusting of what's happening and maybe more engaged, maybe more committed. So I think that's great. If you could go back now in time, not that we can, but if you could go back in time and revisit the Bill Evans from back in the beginning of the journey, if you could change anything, what, if anything, would you do differently?
It's really an easy one. Well, probably thousands of things that I could have done better.
Right.
I mean, anything that didn't work, and there were lots of those, I would change. But probably the biggest screw up of my career was the day I decided that I no longer wanted to sell our products on Amazon. And I was dedicated to our educational dealer network, and Amazon was putting them out of business along with almost all the other booksellers around. And I thought, well, I can make a difference here. So I pulled it out of Amazon. I also pulled all of our books from Ingram, which is the largest wholesale bookseller out in the United States. And after 14 months, I had lost $1.2 million that I would have otherwise earned with Amazon. Sales with the educational retailer had gone up 200,000, so a net loss of $1 million. And where it went up is there were 2 booksellers in our network who then took our books and put them on Amazon, and that's where we got the extra $200,000 in sales. So if I had it to do over again, this is not going to be a surprise. I would leave my books on Amazon, and they're back there now. So anyone who wants to buy them on Amazon, they're available. Easily accessible, and but that's probably the biggest mistake I ever made.
And it sounds like it was a mistake that gave you a very specific financial consequence.
Yes, it did.
We call that a very high price of tuition.
Yes.
For that lesson.
Yes. It was expensive.
So what advice would you give someone else if they were going to start an educationally based business?
Love it, so that you can be happy in it, so that you can have fun doing it. I worked a couple of places previously, not many, but where some of the employees thought mainly about the weekend, their vacation, and retirement. And there didn't seem to be a lot of fun in what they were doing. And it really looked as if life had been sucked out of them. Whatever you do in life, it doesn't matter whether it's, I don't think it's specific to any industry, but you really ought to love it. You ought to have enthusiasm for it. You should be excited about it. You should get up in the morning when you go to work and go, this is going to be awesome. This is going to be incredible. And I think that makes for a happier life, and I think you're much more successful when you can pour your whole self into it. And sometimes that means you work nights and weekends and things like that. But if you love it, if it's fun, that's not a big price to pay.
So enjoy what you're doing.
Yeah.
Make sure that through it all, you keep enjoying what you're doing, because that enjoyment of the activity, that enjoyment of what you're doing will keep you going through the tougher times. It'll keep you going, and in the end, that might be the difference.
Absolutely.
Well, I want to thank you for being on the show today, Bill. We had a great conversation about leadership in your industry, and I'll have you back here in just a few minutes for the Q&A.
Great.
Terrific.
We'll
talk to you right back here in just a couple minutes.
Okay.
It's now time for a featured segment of the Leadership Voice. It's today's Did You Know? Today's Did You Know comes from globalcitizen.org. Millions of children and adults around the world lack the access to education for various reasons. Some live in conflict zones, others aren't allowed to attend school because they're girls, or they attend because their families need them to work and bring in income to support the family. But because education promotes the understanding of social justice, interdependence, and identity, educating our youth is listed as the #1 key to eradicating global poverty by 2030. It's now time for today's Leadership Countdown. Today's show is about education and learning, so we bring you the top 10 ways to make learning fun. The first way is to create simple science experiments. Incorporating anything that is hands-on is a great way to make learning fun. Number 2 is to allow students to work together as a team. There has been extensive research on using cooperative learning strategies in the classroom. Research says that when students work together, they retain information quicker and longer. They develop critical thinking skills as well as build their communication skills. Number 3 is to incorporate hands-on activities. Hands-on activities are a fun way for students to learn. These alphabet activities are not just for preschoolers. Here you will find 5 fun hands-on alphabet activities that you can use in your learning centers. Activities include the ABCs are all about me, magnetic sequencing, alphabet directions, alphabet magic, and mystery box. Number 4 is to give students a brain break. Elementary students work very hard each day, and they deserve a little break. For most teachers, it's easy to see when your students had enough and are in need of a quick pick-me-up. Research has shown that students learn best when they have a brain break throughout the school day. The 5th way to make learning fun is to go on a field trip. Field trips are a great way for students to connect what they're learning in school with the outside world. They get hands-on view of everything that they learned in school, and they get to connect what they learned to what they are seeing at the exhibit. The 6th way is to make review time fun. When your students hear the words, "It's review time," you may hear a few sighs and groans. You can turn those groans into grins by trying some of these top review activities to offer your students: a graffiti wall, 3-2-1 review strategy, post-it practice, move ahead of the class, and sink or swim. The 7th way to make learning fun is to incorporate technology into the lessons. Technology is a great way to make learning fun again. Research has shown that using technology in the classroom can increase student learning and engagement. Consider that Apple's iPod, iPad, and iPhone offer classroom apps that can meet many of your students' instructional needs. Number 8, create fun learning centers. Any activity that gets students working together and up and moving around will be fun. Create fun learning centers that give students a choice, like the Daily 5, or centers that allow them to use the computers or iPads. The 9th way to make learning fun is to teach to students' ability. Like most educators, you probably learned about Howard Gardner's multiple intelligence theory when you were in college. You learned about the 8 different types of intelligences that guide the way we learn and process information. We use this theory to teach to each student's ability. This will make learning much easier for the students, as well as a lot more fun. And finally, the 10th way to make learning fun is to limit your class rules. Too many class rules and expectations can hinder learning. When the classroom environment resembles a boot camp, where is all the fun? Choose 3 to 5 specific and attainable rules. For more information and additional resources about these 10 ways for making learning fun, please visit this website. Please stick around. We have Rachelle Cracchiolo in the studio, and we'll be right back after this commercial break.
Well, we found here at Honda Center and the Anaheim Ducks that the Center for Leadership brings expertise in doing research, in doing training. The faculty that has come and given the training to our employees does all the research themselves. They're not pulling this information off the shelf. They're out there researching themselves, talking from firsthand experience, and it brings such a level of competency that we, again, don't find from other trainers that are on the market.
Well, simply put, as what really differentiates and distinguishes Fullerton and the Center for Leadership really is your expertise. You guys are able to create customized content for our business based on true research.
The faculty from Cal State Fullerton, obviously they're professors of their field. They have deep knowledge and research, but also, aside from the theory, they really bring in some practical examples, and they bring in a lot of interactive activities.
The Bringing Learning to Work initiative is our way of meeting the needs of Orange County businesses and communities. When our clients ask the Center for Leadership to come to bring learning to work, the clients know that they're getting cutting-edge information, the latest thinking in the field, but they're also getting world-class training. Welcome back to the Leadership Voice. Our next guest is Rachelle Cracchiolo. Rachelle is the founder of Teacher-Created Materials. Throughout her career, Rachelle has been a relentless visionary and entrepreneur in education. In 1977, Rachelle was a classroom teacher with a desire to share her ideas with other teachers. Unable to find a publisher for her early books, Rachelle self-published. Now, thousands of titles later, TCM is an award-winning provider of educational curriculum for all grade levels and content areas, used in all 50 states and 89 countries worldwide. Rachelle's mission has always been to create quality materials for teachers and students that are engaging, easy to use, and proven to make a difference. Among her many awards and recognitions, Rachelle received the Distinguished Alumni Award from California State University Fullerton Alumni Association. She currently is a member of the Advancement Board for the College of Education at CSUF. Rachelle earned her BA degree in psychology from Cal State Fullerton, where she also received a Master's of Science in Elementary Curriculum and Instruction. Now it is with great pleasure that I welcome to the Leadership Voice, Rachelle Cracchiolo.
Nice to be here.
Rachelle, it's great to have you on the show to come and share your wisdom and things you've learned about leadership in the educational industry. Maybe we can start by giving you a chance to share a little bit about your journey and how you started Teacher-Created Material.
Well, back in the 70s when I was teaching, there was not a lot of good supplemental materials. California was a textbook state, so we had a certain curriculum, and we created our own curriculum. So around 1977, we wrote a book. I wrote it with another teacher that we couldn't get self-published, and so we published it ourselves. We thought, well, we'll think like a teacher. We know the market. We know how teachers buy, and we published the book. At the same time, I got divorced, and I had 2 children. So I immediately had a need to make more money because with 2 children in childcare, even with a master's degree, I wasn't going to make it. So I looked at the one book, and I figured out how I could sell that book and make an extra $200 a month, which was really the difference between making it and staying independent. And if I had to go get help or do something different. So my motivation was not so much that I wanted to start a business as I just wanted to stay independent and be able to support my family.
And so since then, the company has grown tremendously and added so many titles. Could you talk a little bit about that growth and how it progressed?
Well, at the very beginning, we were just recruiting all the teachers that we knew to write books that we thought were good teachers and had good ideas. So everybody always kind of has a book in them. And so we were creating product and selling it. We used to mail 2,000 letters a week to teachers. We wrote a personal letter. I'd make an art project. We'd tell them why they could use 1 book or 4 books. And that's how we just started doing it. I never took a business class, and I still never have taken a business class. So all the time when we were starting this, we'd say, how can we get to a teacher? How is a teacher going to want what we have? And we were kind of self-taught. I had a lot of mentors, and so did my company, because we were selling an education. And like Bill was talking about before, there were thousands of teacher supply stores. Those teacher supply stores would teach us our business. And because in education, even all of our competitors have the end goal of creating great product for students. It's not as cutthroat as some other businesses are. There's a lot of collaboration as we all tried to figure out how to get to the market.
You know, I love hearing your story and hearing how it grew and became successful. And I know that one of your taglines is, it's not just a tagline, but it's a way that you do business. And you have to correct me if I say it wrong. But one of the things that teacher created material oftentimes says is created by teachers for teachers.
Yes, it's created by teachers for teachers and students.
For teachers and students. And when you described how it took off and how it became successful, you were describing exactly that. And I loved hearing that. I think it really speaks to how our purpose and our mission sort of oftentimes becomes our key to success.
Well, even now, when we have a lot of professional business people working in the company, and we get too business oriented or look at profits too much, we'll always stop everything and say, let's think like a teacher and let's think like a student. And that always gets our focus back to what we're really supposed to be doing, and it's probably one of the reasons the company's been so successful.
Was there ever a time in the company's history when you thought, I don't think we're going to make it?
The closest we came to that was when I was going to leave teaching to actually work in the business full time. At the very beginning, a lot of people worked for free for us. So you had to take that step that you weren't going to have a salary and give up the security that you have for being a teacher, the health insurance. I was tenured, so I knew I'd always have a job. And to make that step without a salary and to go into debt. And the way I went into debt is I did own a home, so I would continually put the second on the home. So that would make my heart skip a little bit. I thought, what if I lose my house? I have to be pretty sure what I'm going to do is going to turn a profit.
Yeah, I mean, there's great risk
Yes.
when you're in those moments. So as you look at the company's success, and the company has had wonderful success and wonderful growth, what brings you the greatest satisfaction as you look at everything that has happened since you started the company over 40 years ago?
I think at the end of the day, we feel like we make a difference not only in the United States, but in the world. We really feel that education is the answer to lots of problems, and that the more we have an educated student population here in the United States and again around the world that can really problem solve and think for themselves. As we create this excellent product and we're out training teachers all over the world, we feel like at the end of the day we're doing something important. And the staff's that way too. They like coming to work and thinking we're going to do something today that could make a difference in a child's life.
And I think that purpose is really, anybody that's interacted with your company and the different folks at your company, they experience that purpose.
I think so. We love teachers, we love children, so.
So if you could go back in time, and we can't, but if you could go back in time with what you know now and use it, say, 40 years ago, if you could go back in time early in your career, what would you do differently?
I always say this around the office, so that was an easy question for me. At the very beginning, we were having lots of teachers working for us and lots of talent, but I would have hired an HR vice president at the very beginning. We went, when we're looking at the company, to hire financial people. Once we hit 10 million and we had to bring more professional people in, we brought in professional salespeople, but we waited a long time before we got an HR department, and we realized as we've gone further that the people are our most valuable asset. in the company, and we would have had somebody full-time looking for the right person for the right seat. We spent a lot of our time doing that, and I think in hindsight, I wish I'd had an HR department.
And so one of the things you mentioned is that what made the company so successful was the way that it focused and the way that it came from teachers, for teachers and students. And it makes sense that those people become so essential to the company.
It's all about people. You know, that really at the end of the day, it's do you have the right person in the right seat? Do you surround yourself with a lot of talented people? Then the business is going to do really well itself.
Yeah, and you know, a lot of businesses are coming to the realization that focusing on profits, focusing on money, doesn't always lead to the money. But when you focus on people and you focus on the product, then the money ends up.
The money will come. I always tell everyone who works for me, do not worry about the money as much as you're doing something where you're learning something and letting the business grow. And at that point, the money comes next. Like, we'll test any idea, you know, and we'll only roll when we see something works. So we're not so focused on the initial profit as we are on how good is the idea, is it going to work with kids, is it going to really help teachers?
Yeah, we recently were talking to some other executives, and they talked about, rather than striving for success, strive to add value.
Right.
And,
that's good, yeah.
And it sounds like a lot of what you're doing is also adding value. And if you know what you're doing is adding value, then...
And you know your market, you know your customer, it's going to come.
No, that's great. What advice would you have for an aspiring person that wanted to start their own business?
Well, I think the most important thing when you're starting a business is to get good advice and mentors. I'll refer to a little bit of what Bill Evans said. We had some great mentors and a lot of people that would help us. Even today, we have advisory boards that talk to us about business, advisory boards from teachers, and making sure that you listen to everybody before you make a decision, I think probably is the most important thing I can suggest to students today.
So again, we have this notion of mentoring, we have this notion of listening, but also we have this notion of making sure that we're surrounded by people that might be willing to tell us things that we might otherwise not ever hear.
It's important.
And so the advice for a future person that wanted to start their own business would therefore be to create some good mentors.
I think that if you're looking for the single best thing, that probably would be it.
Oh, that's great. I want to thank you for being on the show today, Rachelle. We've had a great time talking about your leadership journey, but also talking about leadership in this industry.
Okay.
We're going to be back here in just a few minutes. We have Q&A, and we'll be back here with Bill.
Sounds good.
It's now time for a featured segment of the show, our Leadership Example. Today we bring you the 30 most innovative people in education. Hear that? You know what that means? It's time for today's leadership lesson.
I am Dr. Person, and today's leadership lesson is about challenge in educational leadership. The first challenge in educational leadership is data-driven decision-making. Using data to make decisions allows a leader to clearly define and examine the problem. A leader is able to consider all aspects of a problem, going beyond personal opinion, anecdotal stories, and individual narratives. As a leader, I'm less likely to see all aspects of a problem on my own, and even more unlikely to always know the best solution to a problem. Using data and consulting with others based on what data tells us is critical in today's complex world. Indeed, it is essential to good leadership. A second challenge in educational leadership is knowing and responding to the needs of those you serve. Due to the rapid shifts in demographics, changes in learning styles influenced by the broad access we all have to information through the internet, as well as societal shifts, it's difficult for leaders to predict the needs of those they serve. The complexity of our daily lives, varying ranges of learning needs in the classroom, and community-based needs leaves leaders with more questions about who they serve and to what end. Assessing the needs of learners and other stakeholders is critical. Leaders must remain in touch with those they serve and cast a broad net in doing so. Using various forms of needs assessments helps leaders establish a direction and focus for their teams. The third challenge for educational leaders is identifying and applying best practices to educational problems. Many schools and colleges, as well as other educational entities, have successful practices in place to address the achievement gap and opportunity gap. Leaders must access and implement interventions based on proven success. No intervention can work exactly as it did in one place for all places, but best practices can be adapted for implementation in other settings, especially when a leader knows their constituents and knows what works based on data. Your leadership lesson today is that leaders should strive to be flexible, creative, and resourceful, using data-driven decision-making processes, knowing the needs of those they serve, and accessing and applying best practices to achieve success. I am Dr. Person, and this has been your leadership lesson.
It's now time for the Leadership Voices Q&A. Do you need some leadership advice? Well, you've come to the right place. Every show, we take questions from you, our viewers, and answer them right here on the show. Today we have 4 questions for our guests. So let's get to today's questions. The first one is for Bill, and it comes from Ross in Torrance, California. Ross asks, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing the educational industry today and in the future?
Well, it's change. I mean, everything is very different than it was when I started in 1979 and when Rachelle started in 1977. The way you teach, the technology that's available to you is changing. The distribution channels of your product is constantly changing. For instance, in the music business, they're making about 10% of what they used to make about 20 years ago. And the reason is the digitation of music. In some cases with publishing and the ease with which it is to share published materials, copyrighted materials, has meant that selling has become more and more of a challenge. But if I were really to pick something in education, I would say it would be programs that help parents, the original teacher, help their children get prepared for school. And I don't see a universal program like that out there.
Great.
So I think the biggest issue today in education is equity. How do you make things equal for students in the country? You know, they a lot of times look at students and they're looking at test scores by, are you Hispanic, are you Black? But the true thing they should be looking at is poverty and where the kids are coming from. And how do you make sure everybody has internet access? How do you make sure they have quality teachers? How do you even feed them? Lots of schools, they're feeding kids 3 days a week, 3 meals a day. So I think equity and solving equity problems, just not in the United States, but around the world, is probably the biggest issue we have.
Oh, that's great. So our second question is for Rachelle, and it comes from Min in Irvine, California. Min asks, what do you think is the single most important trait or skill for a good leader to have?
Well, I think it's candor. So when people come to work at TCM, I do an orientation and I do a leadership, I run a leadership academy there, and that's my answer. It's candor. So when I'm talking to you or you're talking to me, we have to put our cards on the table and really hear what the other person's saying and be honest. So that's my number one skill is candor.
Something we talked about earlier, which is listening. I mean, to be a leader, you have to be willing to listen to the ultimate customer. You have to be willing to listen to your employees. And when I say listen, not just hearing, but actually understanding what they're saying and incorporate it into your leadership.
So we have two traits that are really important. We have developing a strong sense of candor and honesty, as well as really focusing and really listening to the messages and to what others are saying.
Yeah.
So our third question is for Bill Evans, and it comes from John in Alhambra. And John asks, if you didn't start your educational publishing company, what do you think you would do instead?
Well, the easy answer would be to either continue practicing law or to go back to teaching again, both of which, well, I enjoyed teaching a lot. Practicing law, not so much. But since I have Rachelle, my friend sitting here, she's always told me that I should be on radio and that I should have a radio show, and that appeals to me a lot.
So you'd be a radio show host.
It could be almost anything. Yeah.
You've definitely got the voice for it.
Yeah, thank you.
He's very funny.
Yeah.
You have a great show.
What about you, Rachelle?
I think that I would have some kind of a business. When we've thought a couple times of selling our business, I'll think of a new idea. What I didn't realize as a young person was how much I loved business. I mean, I loved teaching, I loved education, but I think at the end of the day, I actually love the concept of starting a business. So I can think of a lot of different ideas of things I'd do. So.
But you'd most likely be an entrepreneur.
I would. I'm an entrepreneur for sure.
No, that's great. So our fourth question is for Rachelle, and it comes from Parumba in Cerritos, California. Parumba asks, how is technology and the internet changing your industry?
Well, I think that's one of the things that's helping with inequality in the schools right now, with equity. Information now is available very easily to lots of people with the internet, and I think that's a good thing. College classes, podcasts. I mean, if you can take responsibility for yourself, you can really educate yourself with everything that's on there. Some of the things Microsoft has done with the Khan Academy are just really interesting, the free resources that are available. And then on the technology end, we have lots of tools right now for problem solving, because you can't just teach kids facts anymore because everything changes all the time. So with technology tools, I think we have a better opportunity to teach kids to problem solve.
Great. So you see it as more opportunities.
Yes.
It does, in terms of the different modalities you can use in teaching, and it's changing the way we distribute, which I mentioned earlier. And sometimes, if you don't keep up with those changes, you lose a lot of business. But the point is that the paper catalog is not how you sell things anymore. You use social media, you use email, you use the internet in ways that weren't even thought of 10 years ago. So from that point of view, it's changed business. In some cases, it's really lowered the bar for people to get into business, because now they can use companies like Amazon or eBay and start their own business without having to have a warehouse or having something printed, for instance. I mean, that's why self-publishing has become something really big on many websites. So I'd say it's overall a very positive thing, and every time I look at my smartphone, I realize the things I can do now anywhere in the world without having to be at a desk or at an office. And it's just an amazing amount of freedom that you're given.
But having the technology and the internet and the digital age here, neither of you described it as a negative thing for a publishing company.
It's here. I mean, if I spent my time doing that, it was sort of like, well, what are you going to do about it? Where are you going to find the opportunity? Where's the challenge?
No, that's great. Well, I want to thank you both, Bill and Rachelle, for being on the show and answering our questions from our audience. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you both.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
If you have questions or need advice, send us your questions here to the Leadership Voice by email, leadershipvoice@fullerton.edu, or by Twitter @CSUF_leadership. Well, I think that's all the time we have for today's show. Today we talked a lot about leadership in the educational industry, Thank you to our guests, Bill Evans and Rachelle Cracchiolo, for joining us. Join us each episode of The Leadership Voice as we feature fresh and relevant topics that can help you become a great leader. I'm Jay Barbuto, and on behalf of the Center for Leadership at Cal State Fullerton, we'll see you next time right here on The Leadership Voice.